because Olaf Scholz is in a political bind. There's a deal there to be made. The question is how desperate Europe is at the time that that deal is still on the table. Because the longer you wait, and the more certain decisive Russian victory becomes, the less likely it is that Russia is going to want to be seen as giving away that which it doesn't need to give. And asking for Ukrainian membership for NATO, Russia will never go with it. It'll never happen. The best you're going to get is neutrality, and hope that Russia is kind enough to leave enough of Ukraine, physically intact that you can. Ukraine has economic viability. Dnipropetrovsk, Odessa, Kharkov, Sumy, Mykolaiv, these are territories that Russia could easily justify absorbing, given what Sumy should never be Ukraine again because it was used as a launching pad into Kursk. Kharkov should never be Ukraine again because it was used as launching pad into Belgorod. Odessa is used to attack Crimea. Russia has every right to say, you've lost these territories in perpetuity, they will become part of Russia, and insist on that being part of a final peace deal. Maybe Germany can come in and negotiate something that says, we'll lift the sanctions, we'll get you back into the energy business in Europe, but you have to be satisfied with the territory. And look at Putin. He said, we're not in it for territorial acquisition. So there's a compromise out there waiting to be had. Let's see if Germany has the ability to pull this off. But right now, Germany is desperate. But Europe is not far behind. I mean, what's happening to Germany is going to happen to the rest of Europe.
Scott Ritter's insight here sets the stage for a grim but realistic assessment of the conflict. As Ukraine's strategic losses on the battlefield increase, Russia's leverage grows, and the possibility of negotiating any favorable terms for Ukraine diminishes. Europe, particularly Germany, may find itself in a position where it has to scramble to save what little influence it has left. Let's dive deeper into the potential fallout from this scenario and examine what Scott Ritter meant by neutrality being the best possible outcome for Ukraine and why Europe may be left holding the bag. As the war drags on, it's becoming increasingly clear that Russia is in a position of strength. Ritter is blunt in his assessment. Russia doesn't need to concede territories that it already controls or could justify absorbing. Areas like Kharkiv, Sumy, and Odessa, which Ritter points out have been used to launch attacks on Russia, may well be lost to Ukraine forever. Ukraine's military strategy, bolstered by NATO equipment and training, hasn't been enough to turn the tide. With each passing day, Russia's grip on these contested regions tightens. The idea of Ukraine joining NATO, a major sticking point for the West, is now a non-starter. Ritter argues that the best-case scenario for Ukraine is neutrality, a buffer state between Russia and NATO, free from further entanglement in great power conflicts. This idea of neutrality harkens back to proposals earlier in the conflict, where some diplomats suggested that a neutral Ukraine might be the key to long-term peace in the region. But with Russia gaining the upper hand militarily, neutrality may be the best outcome Ukraine can hope for, rather than a stepping stone toward full NATO membership. Olaf Scholz, the German chancellor, faces an increasingly difficult situation. Ritter's statement about Scholz being in a political bind reflects the internal and external pressures on Germany. Domestically, Scholz's government is dealing with a slowing economy, an energy crisis, and growing public frustration over the continued support for Ukraine. Externally, Germany's status as a leader in the European Union and its ties to the United States push it to maintain a hard line on sanctions against Russia, despite the economic blowback. Germany is in a tough spot, but it may still hold a key role in future negotiations. Ritter hints that Germany could come to the table with a deal involving the lifting of sanctions and a return to energy cooperation with Russia. The question, however, is whether Russia will still be willing to negotiate by then. As Ritter says, the longer you wait and the more decisive Russia's victory becomes, the less likely Russia will be to give anything away. Scholz might be banking on a diplomatic solution, but he's running out of time. Germany's desperation is already evident in its energy policy, with gas prices skyrocketing and industries struggling to cope. The rest of Europe isn't far behind, as Ritter notes, and soon the entire continent could find itself in the same bind as Germany. The territorial stakes in this conflict are enormous. Ritter's remarks point to specific regions, Kharkiv, Sumy, Odessa, that Russia may permanently annex or control. From a Russian perspective, these territories are not just prizes of war, but are seen as security necessities. Kharkiv and Sumy have been used as launching pads for attacks into Russian territory, and Odessa's strategic importance cannot be overstated. If Russia decides to absorb these areas, it will change the geopolitical map of Eastern Europe permanently. Ukraine could lose access to the Black Sea, further crippling its already struggling economy. The loss of these territories would also be a huge psychological blow, as cities like Kharkiv and Odessa are historically and culturally significant to Ukraine. Ritter's observation that Russia has every right to say you've lost these territories in perpetuity reflects the harsh reality that Ukraine may face if it continues to fight a losing battle. The final peace deal, if one is ever reached, could see Ukraine reduced to a landlocked, economically fragile state, struggling to maintain sovereignty over what remains. Vladimir Putin has repeatedly stated that territorial conquest is not the primary goal of Russia's military operation. Ritter acknowledges this, but also points out that the situation on the ground could change those calculations. If Russia sees an opportunity to secure its long-term security by holding on to key Ukrainian regions, it may very well do so. NATO's role in this conflict, particularly its failure to provide the decisive support Ukraine needed to turn the tide, has been a point of contention. While NATO members have provided weapons, training, and intelligence, they have been unwilling to directly intervene in the conflict. This hands-off approach has left Ukraine to bear the brunt of the fighting, while NATO focuses on maintaining the fragile unity of its member states. However, as Ritter implies, Russia's growing dominance means that NATO's influence in shaping the outcome of this conflict is waning. The longer the war goes on, the less likely it is that NATO will be able to broker a deal that benefits Ukraine. The window for diplomacy is closing fast, and NATO's failure to decisively support Ukraine may come to be seen as one of its greatest strategic blunders. Germany may be the first European nation feeling the pressure, but it won't be the last. As Ritter warns, what's happening to Germany is going to happen to the rest of Europe. The energy crisis sparked by the sanctions on Russia has already caused inflation and shortages across the continent. As winter approaches, the situation will only get worse. European unity, fragile at the best of times, is being tested like never before. Countries like Hungary and Italy have already expressed reluctance to continue with sanctions that are hurting their economies. If Germany, the economic powerhouse of Europe, is on the verge of a major crisis, it's only a matter of time before other countries follow. The longer the war drags on, the more divided Europe will become. Ritter's prediction of a continental crisis is not far-fetched. As European leaders continue to grapple with the consequences of the war and the sanctions, they may be forced to make tough decisions. Will they continue to back Ukraine at any cost, or will they seek a compromise with Russia to ease the economic burden? Scott Ritter's analysis is a sobering reminder that time is running out for Europe to find a way out of this crisis. Olaf Scholz may be in a political bind, but he's not the only one. The entire European Union faces a future of uncertainty, as the war in Ukraine grinds on and the economic impact deepens. The longer Europe waits, the more difficult it will be to negotiate a peace deal that preserves Ukrainian sovereignty and stability. And with Russia's position growing stronger by the day, the chances of Europe getting a favorable deal are slipping away. Ritter's message is clear. The clock is ticking, and Europe cannot afford to wait any longer. According to Scott Ritter, Olaf Scholz is in a political bind. There's a deal to be made, but the question is how desperate Europe will be by the time that deal is still on the table. The longer Europe waits and the more decisive Russia's victory becomes, the less likely it is that Russia will feel the need to concede anything. Asking for Ukrainian NATO membership is a non-starter. Russia will never agree to it. The best outcome you can hope for is neutrality, and hopefully, Russia will leave enough of Ukraine intact to maintain some level of economic viability. Regions like Dnipro, Odessa, Kharkiv, and Sumy are territories Russia could easily justify absorbing. Sumy, for example, should never be part of Ukraine again because it was used as a launching pad into Kursk. Kharkiv was used to launch attacks into Belgorod, and Odessa was used to attack Crimea. Russia could argue that Ukraine has lost these territories permanently, and they would become part of Russia, insisting this be part of any final peace deal. Maybe Germany could negotiate something that involves lifting sanctions and reintegrating Russia into Europe's energy market in exchange for territorial compromises. Putin has said they're not in it for territorial acquisition, so there's a potential compromise waiting to be made. The question is whether Germany has the ability to pull this off. Right now, Germany is desperate, but the rest of Europe isn't far behind. What's happening to Germany will soon affect the rest of Europe. Thanks for watching.